Not divine will, not sheer numbers, but the fusion of science, strategy, and timing. In 1683, two civilizations clashed before the walls of Vienna. The disciplined empire of the Crescent and a rising coalition forging a new Europe. What unfolded was not merely a siege, but a turning point where the age of medieval warfare gave way to the birth of modern. You're watching Heroic History News, where the past isn't just remembered, it's relived. Here we bring back the echoes of empire and faith, of kings and warriors, of inventions that shaped destiny. If you believe history still breathes through every age, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us, because today we reveal the secret weapon that destroyed the Ottoman army at the Battle of Vienna. In the year 1683, Europe stood on the edge of transformation, an age poised between faith and reason, between the armies of empire and the emerging science of war. For more than 2 centuries, the Ottoman crescent had advanced relentlessly across 3 continents. It had crushed Byzantium, shattered Hungary, and cast its shadow over the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. The siege of Vienna was not a sudden thunderclap, but the echo of centuries, the culmination of a world system reaching both its zenith and its strain. From the golden domes of Istanbul, the Ottoman Empire still appeared invincible. Its fleets ruled the eastern Mediterranean. Its provinces stretched from the deserts of Arabia to the forests of Transylvania. Yet beneath that majesty, the gears of the imperial machine had begun to grind unevenly. The vast bureaucracy that once ensured efficiency now drowned in corruption and delay. The Janissary Corps, once the most disciplined infantry in the world, had grown politicized, complacent, and resistant to reform. Provincial governors ruled like minor kings, taxing ruthlessly to sustain the court's ambitions. And above it all stood Sultan Mehmed IV, detached from the realities of the frontier, delegating full military power to his Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha. Kara Mustafa was a man of brilliance and pride, a soldier and statesman of icy composure. To his mind, conquest was not merely an act of expansion, but a declaration of destiny. The capture of Vienna, the last imperial fortress before the open plains of Bavaria, would transform the balance of the continent. It would avenge the failed Ottoman siege of 1529, surpass the glories of Suleiman the Magnificent, and make Kara Mustafa the architect of a new age of Ottoman supremacy. But unlike earlier conquerors, he dreamed not of plunder, but of possession. Vienna, he declared, was to be taken intact, its palaces preserved, its churches converted into mosques, its people spared as subjects of the Sultan. This vision of conquest without destruction would shape every choice he made and doom him in the end. Across the frontier, the Holy Roman Empire was a world in disarray. Emperor Leopold I, cautious and pious, faced rebellion in Hungary, French pressure on the Rhine, and deep mistrust among the German princes. Vienna's defenses were formidable, bastioned walls in the latest Italian style, but the manpower to defend them was meager. When word reached the city that the Ottoman host had crossed the frontier in the spring of 1683, panic rippled through the empire. The Habsburg court fled westward to Passau, leaving Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg, a battle-hardened veteran, to command the city's meager garrison of 15,000 men. Kara Mustafa's army, between 120,000 and 150,000 strong, marched north through Ottoman-held Hungary with the precision of a living organism. Every stage of the advance was supported by magazine depots along the Danube, by flotillas of river barges, and by caravans stretching to the horizon. The Ottomans were masters of logistics, the art of moving mass. They brought with them engineers, gunners, imams, and sappers, even mobile forges and bakeries. Yet the very magnitude of this army, its strength in numbers and supply, would become its greatest burden. Each mile lengthened its arteries. Each fortress bypassed risked rebellion behind the line. By mid-July, the first Ottoman banners appeared before Vienna. The city gates were sealed, its suburbs burned to deny cover. Within days, the great encampment of the Ottoman army rose like a city of silk and smoke beside the Danube. Tens of thousands of tents arranged in geometric order around the vizier's green pavilion. Siege lines crept outward like the rings of a tightening snare. Ottoman artillery began to thunder, their shells striking bastions named after saints. St. Stephen, St. Leopold, St. Michael, until the very symbols of Christendom shook. Inside Vienna, Starhemberg's defenders endured under fire and famine. Civilians crowded cellars as roofs collapsed. Mines exploded beneath bastions, opening gaps that were hastily filled with rubble and timber. The garrison fought not only the enemy, but hunger and disease. Yet morale held, anchored by the knowledge that Europe watched and that if Vienna fell, there would be no wall between the Ottoman frontier and the heartlands of the empire. Beyond the besieged city, a miracle of diplomacy was unfolding. In Rome, Pope Innocent XI poured treasure into what he called a Holy League, a desperate effort to unite Christendom's divided powers. Bavaria, Saxony, and the minor German principalities pledged contingents. The emperor's cousin, Charles of Lorraine, rallied the imperial army. But it was in Krakow that the coalition found its spearhead, John III. Sobieski, King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania, had faced the Ottomans and Tatars for most of his life. He understood their strengths, their mobility, their mastery of sieges, their faith in momentum, and their growing weakness: rigidity. The Polish Sejm was reluctant to fund a foreign war. But Sobieski acted from conviction. Bound by treaty to aid the Habsburgs, he also saw in Vienna's defense a greater purpose: the preservation of Christian Europe and the assertion of Poland's place within it. Gathering 27,000 of his finest troops, including his elite winged hussars, he marched west across the Carpathians, vowing that no wall shall fall while the Polish crown still stands. As summer burned toward autumn, two forces approached their fated collision. Kara Mustafa encircled Vienna with the patience of a serpent, tightening the siege day by day. Sobieski advanced through Moravia with the urgency of a man who knew that time itself was the enemy. By early September, Vienna's bastions were crumbling, its food exhausted. Within the walls, the defenders prepared for a last stand. And far to the west, on the wooded ridges of the Vienna woods, banners of the Holy League began to appear. The Ottoman army was a masterpiece of organization, a reflection of an empire turned into flesh and steel. At its center stood the Janissaries, Janitsary. Once the most feared infantry in the world, born from the Devshirme system, they had been raised from childhood to serve the Sultan alone, celibate, loyal, and trained in musketry and melee alike. Their matchlock muskets were deadly at close range and their discipline legendary. But by 1683, that purity had faded. Many were now hereditary members who paid bribes for promotion. Their muskets, once the cutting edge of warfare, had become relics of an older age. Against the flintlocks of Europe, their slow-burning cords sputtered like ghosts of innovation long past. Supporting them were the Sipahi, the empire's feudal cavalry, armored riders drawn from the Timar land system, where estates were exchanged for service. They carried curved sabers, composite bows, and the pride of centuries. Yet on the plains of Central Europe, the Sipahi's valor met a new reality: the geometry of fire. Line infantry and mobile cannon had rewritten the grammar of battle. Maneuver and courage no longer guaranteed victory when met by disciplined volleys and precise artillery. The Ottoman arsenal still held magnificence. Their bronze siege guns, cast in imperial foundries at Tofane, could batter walls into dust. Their engineers, Topçu and Lağımçı, were unrivaled in siegecraft, tunneling beneath bastions and igniting mines that tore stone from earth. Their camp was a marvel of order: concentric rings of tents guarded by trenches and redoubts, serviced by smiths, cooks, and clerics. Yet these strengths concealed a fatal rigidity. The empire that once conquered through movement now fought entangled in its own system. Kara Mustafa's insistence on preserving Vienna's beauty turned an offensive engine into a static machine. Each day spent tunneling beneath walls was a day lost to hunger, disease, and time. Logistics, once the empire's hidden weapon, became its silent enemy. The magazine stations along the Danube strained to feed the army. Raids by Hungarian insurgents cut convoys. Horses perished by the thousands. The summer heat soured food and morale alike. Ottoman soldiers still prayed at dawn and marched in order, but their strength was ebbing unseen. When the vizier looked toward Vienna's towers, he still saw victory. Yet behind him, his army was slowly dying of its own weight. Across the Kahlenberg and Leopoldsburg ridges, a very different army gathered, smaller in number but sharper in design. The Christian coalition commanded by John III Sobieski had no single language, no shared banner, but one purpose. It united Austrians, Poles, Bavarians, Saxons, and Franconians in a system of coordination that would later define modern warfare. At its core stood the infantry, trained in the pike and shot doctrine perfected in the 30 Years' War. These soldiers fought as one organism, musketeers firing in rotating volleys, while pikemen guarded their flanks against cavalry. Their flintlock muskets, with faster ignition and better weather resistance, gave them an edge that no Ottoman matchlock could match. Sobieski and Duke Charles of Lorraine drilled their men to fire by signal, volleys timed like clockwork, a storm of lead synchronized by discipline rather than zeal. Behind them stood the artillery, the coalition's man-made metal. Engineers from Bavaria and Austria had refined lightweight iron culverins and mortars mounted on trunnions that allowed rapid repositioning. These guns no longer belonged to sieges alone. They were instruments of maneuver, capable of firing, advancing, and firing again. A rolling tide of precision. Their ammunition included canister shot, turning every blast into a scythe of iron that shredded infantry and cavalry alike. From the high ground of the Vienna woods, such weapons would soon command the field like thunder from heaven. And then there were the Polish winged hussars, Europe's most legendary cavalry. Clad in gleaming armor adorned with arching wings of eagle feathers, they combined speed, mass, and fear into a single strike. Their charge was not chaos, but calculus, a kinetic equation in flesh and steel. Among their weapons, one stood apart. The copia, the lance of the winged, a masterpiece of mechanical design that turned human motion into pure kinetic destruction. In the hands of a hussar, a copia was not merely a spear, but an extension of the rider's body and the momentum of his warhorse. Measuring between 5.5 and 6 meters, it was long enough to outrange any opposing weapon, yet astonishingly light. Its upper shaft was hollow, crafted from pine or spruce, woods chosen for elasticity and weight, while its lower core was solid for stability. The steel tip, hand-forged and often etched with the Polish eagle, gave balance and identity to each lance. When the hussars charged downhill, the copia became a living projectile, a vector of energy rather than a weapon of muscle. Contemporary witnesses described the first impact of their line as a moving wall of iron, where the front ranks shattered through the enemy as if through wood. The formula was simple: speed plus mass equals kinetic impact. The physics of annihilation long before physics had a name. But the copia's true genius lay in its intentional fragility. Unlike the short, heavy lances of Western knights, it was meant to break, to explode on contact in a burst of splinters that released its stored energy in one violent instant. The hollow shaft directed the fracture forward, ensuring that the blow transferred maximum force before giving way. In that fracture lay the secret of the continuous charge. As the front lances broke, the riders drew their curved sabers, the zabla, and pressed onward without losing speed. Each impact was thus not an end but a pulse, one shockwave feeding the next, a storm of flesh, horse, and steel rolling down the slope in unstoppable rhythm. The copia was thus more than a weapon. It was the distilled essence of the Polish art of war, grace engineered into devastation, elegance sharpened into velocity. At dawn on September 12, 1683, the hills above Vienna were veiled in a thin mist. Below, the Ottoman camp stretched for miles along the banks of the Danube, a labyrinth of tents, trenches, and artillery emplacements. The city walls, shattered and blackened by months of bombardment, stood like the bones of a dying giant. For Kara Mustafa Pasha, the siege seemed nearly won. His miners had already breached several bastions, and his guns thundered methodically. Yet what he did not see, or refused to believe, was that the true battle had already begun. Not in his trenches, but on the wooded slopes behind it. From the Kahlenberg Ridge, the Christian coalition was assembling the most complex assault Europe had ever seen. In the cold morning air, drums rolled through the trees, banners unfurled, and the clang of armor echoed between the pines. King John III, Sobieski, mounted on a chestnut charger, surveyed the plain below through a brass telescope. What he saw was both opportunity and peril. The Ottoman camp's rear exposed, its defenses facing east toward Vienna, not west toward the hills. This was the weak point, the hinge of the entire siege line, and it was about to be struck. At approximately 4 a.m., Austrian and Bavarian artillery opened fire from the coalition's left flank. Their target was not the city, but the Ottoman outer works, redoubts, palisades, and batteries guarding the western perimeter. The thunder of the guns was amplified by the hills, creating an echo that rolled across the valley like an earthquake. Smoke drifted down into the Ottoman camp, confusing sentries who thought the firing came from inside Vienna. This early deception fractured communication between Kara Mustafa's forward and rear lines. As the sun rose, infantry regiments under Duke Charles of Lorraine began descending from the left, advancing through vineyards and ravines toward the villages of Nussdorf and Heiligenstadt. They met fierce resistance. Ottoman janissaries and sipahi, entrenched behind earthworks, opened volleys of musket fire, while light cavalry darted out to harass the advancing Germans. The Christians responded with disciplined volleys of flintlock muskets, their faster rate of fire cutting down Ottoman skirmishers before they could reload. What had once been a decisive Ottoman advantage in mobility now faltered before modern European fire discipline. The Austrian artillery followed closely behind, leapfrogging their guns in a new technique known as rolling fire support. Rather than remaining static, gun crews would fire, then advance 50 paces while the next battery opened up. This created a continuous wall of pressure that drove the Ottomans back step by step. By mid-morning, the coalition's left and center had secured the lower slopes, their guns now within range of the Ottoman camp. At the center of the battlefield, the Imperial infantry met the full fury of the Janissary Corps. Despite their decline, the Janissaries remained formidable in defense. Clad in mail and turbans, armed with matchlocks and scimitars, they fought from behind gabions and trenches, turning the ground into a killing zone. Their volleys were slower but powerful, each musket spitting flame through the morning haze. The Imperial troops, however, were trained to absorb such fire, alternating ranks to maintain continuous volleys. Pikes braced against cavalry charges. The clash here became a brutal contest of endurance. Sobieski's plan depended on this center holding firm. The infantry's task was not to break the Ottomans outright, but to fix them in place, to draw their attention, their strength, and their reserves away from the flanks. Every volley fired, every yard of ground contested, served to distract Kara Mustafa from the true threat forming in the shadows of the Kahlenberg Ridge. Meanwhile, engineers and Imperial pioneers cleared obstacles under fire, cutting gaps through hedgerows and filling trenches for cavalry passage. Each minute bought by the infantry brought the coalition closer to its decisive strike. By midday, the battle had expanded into a full-scale artillery duel. The Ottomans had placed their heavy cannons in siege positions aimed at the city, not the western approach. Turning them around took precious time. Their guns, massive bronze pieces cast in Istanbul, could hurl stone and iron balls with devastating force. But their rate of fire was glacial, one shot every several minutes. The coalition artillery, though smaller, used iron-barreled culverins and mortars, firing explosive shells and canister shot at a much faster rhythm. The difference in gunpowder chemistry and barrel metallurgy was decisive. European gunpowder, refined through decades of experimentation in German and Dutch foundries, burned hotter and cleaner. Ottoman powder, coarser and less consistent, produced more smoke and fouling. As the battle wore on, the Ottoman batteries became choked in their own haze, while the Allied guns, firing from higher ground, found their mark again and again. At noon, coalition mortars began shelling the Ottoman camp directly. Tents burst into flame, ammunition wagons exploded, horses panicked and broke their tethers. The once orderly camp became a storm of chaos and confusion. Kara Mustafa's aides urged him to redeploy his cavalry, but he hesitated, unwilling to abandon the siege lines still hammering Vienna's walls. That hesitation would cost him everything. While the infantry and artillery engaged the Ottoman front, Sobieski gathered his cavalry on the right flank, hidden behind the wooded ridges. The ground here was steep and uneven, terrain most commanders would have avoided for a mounted charge. But Sobieski, a master of battlefield geometry, saw potential where others saw peril. He knew that a downhill charge, properly timed and concentrated, could generate an impact no army on earth could withstand. His cavalry was organized in 3 echelons. In front, the winged hussars, 3,000 strong. Behind them, the Polish panzerni and Austrian cuirassiers, and in reserve, German and Bavarian horse. Each rider was a weapon of precision. The hussars' kopia lances, up to 5.5 meters long, were designed to shatter on impact, transferring kinetic force through the enemy line. Their armor was lighter than it appeared, steel breastplates over silk and leather, optimized for speed, and the wings, wooden arcs mounted with eagle or ostrich feathers, were not mere decoration. They whistled in the air, creating a sound like rushing wind, said to unnerve enemy horses and men alike. By 4 p.m., Sobieski's scouts reported that the Ottoman lines were stretched thin, their reserves committed, their camp in turmoil. The Polish king turned to his officers and gave the signal history would remember. The time has come to save Vienna and Christendom. Trumpets blared, drums thundered, 18,000 horsemen began to move. It began as a rumble, distant at first, then swelling like thunder. Down the slopes of Kahlenberg and Leopoldsburg poured the might of European cavalry. The charge was the largest in recorded history. 18,000 riders descending in waves over vineyards and meadows toward the Ottoman camp. At the front, Sobieski himself led the winged hussars, banners streaming. The momentum was unstoppable. Gravity turned speed into power and power into annihilation. The Ottoman left flank, composed mostly of irregular infantry and light cavalry, collapsed almost instantly. The hussars crashed through them like an iron tide, breaking lines that had stood unbroken for hours. Behind them came the cuirassiers, sabers flashing, trampling the disordered camp. The charge struck at the precise seam between the Ottoman field army and its siege works, the point of maximum vulnerability. Artillery crews abandoned their guns. Janissaries turned to fight only to be swept aside. Command tents fell amid smoke and screams. Kara Mustafa's central redoubt, hastily fortified around his green banner, was the last to stand. For a few desperate minutes, the Grand Vizier's guards resisted, firing muskets and cannon into the oncoming cavalry. Then the winged hussars hit. Lances shattered, sabers flashed, and the Ottoman command post disintegrated under the onslaught. Kara Mustafa himself barely escaped with his life, fleeing across the Danube as night fell. The Christian coalition, though outnumbered 2-1, had achieved total victory. What then was the secret weapon that destroyed the Ottoman army at Vienna? Not a single device or miracle, but a symphony of elements, each small advantage combining into overwhelming dominance. It was terrain, the use of the Kahlenberg Ridge as both shield and springboard. It was timing, the patience to fix the Ottoman army before unleashing the cavalry. It was technology, flintlocks, iron cannon, and disciplined volleys outmatching outdated systems. It was command, Sobieski's unified leadership in a coalition that should have fractured. And above all, it was momentum, the transformation of energy, physical and moral, into one decisive strike. As darkness settled over Vienna, the fires of the Ottoman camp burned through the night. Survivors fled south toward Hungary, abandoning cannons, treasure, and tens of thousands of dead. Within the city, church bells rang and soldiers wept. Sobieski entered Vienna at dawn, greeted not as a conqueror, but as a savior. In his report to Pope Innocent V, he wrote simply, "We came, we saw, God conquered." In the months that followed, Kara Mustafa Pasha was executed by order of the Sultan, strangled with a silk cord, the ultimate punishment for failure. The empire he had served so ambitiously would never again threaten Central Europe with such force. For the Holy League, the victory marked the beginning of the Great Turkish War, a 16-year campaign that would roll the Ottomans back across the Balkans. Cities like Buda, Belgrade, and eventually Sarajevo would fall one after another. Vienna became the symbol of Europe's resilience, the fortress that did not fall. And John III Sobieski, the Polish king who had gambled everything, was immortalized as the savior of Christendom. Yet his true genius was not in piety, but in perception. He understood that war was changing, and that speed, coordination, and technology were the new instruments of victory. And so ended the siege of Vienna with an empire broken. If you live for moments like these, like, subscribe, and stay with us on the channel of Heroic History English, where the echoes of the past still march, charge, and thunder through time.